It was February 15th, 2026, at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so vivid and terrifying that I woke gasping for air drove me to the meadow 3 miles from my home, and there, surrounded by acres of wildflowers barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, their stems bending in waves under a wind that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I understood about what's coming in March 2026. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. You've been marked because you're here right now, reading these words. That's not coincidence, that's divine appointment. I'm Jonathan Rumi. Many of you know me as the actor who portrays Jesus in The Chosen, but what I'm about to share with you has nothing to do with acting, nothing to do with scripts or cameras or production schedules. What happened to me in that meadow over 3 consecutive nights has wrecked me, rebuilt me, and left me with a burden I cannot carry alone, a message I was explicitly commanded to share, regardless of the cost, regardless of who believes me, regardless of what it does to my reputation. Before I go any further, I need you to do something. I need you to leave your prayer requests in the comments below. I don't care how impossible your situation seems. I don't care if you've prayed 1,000 times with no answer. Leave it there. Because what Jesus showed me in that meadow is directly connected to the prayers of his people. And I believe, I know, that those who engage with this message, those who are truly seeking, are going to experience breakthrough in ways that will leave you undone. And please, if you consider yourself a true believer, someone who doesn't just play at Christianity but actually wants to hear what the Spirit is saying right now, in this moment, for this specific time, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, because I'm telling you with everything in me, the messages coming through this channel in the next few weeks are not for the casual observer. They're for the remnant. They're for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Let me establish something before I go further. I didn't ask for this. I didn't seek this out. I'm an actor, a storyteller, someone who has been given the extraordinary privilege of portraying the Son of God on screen. That role has changed my life in ways I'm still processing. It's brought me closer to Jesus than I ever imagined possible. It's also made me acutely aware of my own inadequacy, my own sinfulness, my own desperate need for the very grace I'm depicting. But this, what I'm about to share with you, this transcends anything related to the show. This is not Jonathan the actor speaking. This is Jonathan the broken servant, the terrified messenger, the man who encountered the living Christ in a meadow filled with wildflowers and was given a message that I would give anything not to have to deliver. It was cold that first night, bitterly cold. February in this part of the country can be deceptive, beautiful during the day, brutal before dawn. I'd thrown on jeans, boots, a heavy jacket, but the cold seemed to penetrate everything, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache, the kind of cold that makes you question your sanity for being outside at all. I didn't bring a flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me knew I wouldn't need one. Maybe because the dream had been so specific, so directive, that I was moving on autopilot, just obeying without thinking. The meadow sits in a valley between 2 low hills, accessible by a dirt road that becomes impassable when it rains. I'd been there before, during daylight, during a location scout for something that never materialized. It's the kind of place that photographers love. Endless wildflowers in spring and summer, golden grasses in fall, stark and haunting in winter. At 2:47 a.m. in mid-February, it was a void, a darkness so complete that I could barely see my hand in front of my face. But I walked. I walked because the dream had shown me exactly where to go. Past the old fence post leaning at a 45-degree angle, past the cluster of 3 oak trees that stand like sentinels at the meadow's edge, out into the center, where the land dips slightly and the wildflowers grow thickest when the season is right. The wind was constant, not gusting, not howling, just steady and cold and relentless. It carried the scent of earth and dried grass and something else, something I couldn't identify, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there in the darkness, my breath forming clouds in front of my face, and I said out loud, "I'm here. I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here." And that's when the light came. Not from the sky, not from any external source I could identify. It was just suddenly there, surrounding me, emanating from everywhere at once. Soft at first, like the first hint of dawn, but growing steadily brighter until I had to shield my eyes. And in that light, he stood. Jesus. Not the Jesus I portray on screen, not the Jesus of paintings or stained glass or religious imagination, the Jesus who is fully God and fully man, whose presence carries a weight that makes you want to fall on your face and never rise, whose eyes contain depths of love and sorrow and holy fire that no human expression could ever capture. He was weeping. I need you to understand this. He was weeping, tears running down his face, his shoulders shaking with the force of his grief. And when he looked at me, when his eyes met mine, I felt the full weight of what those tears meant. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was like nothing I can adequately describe, like thunder and whisper combined, like every beautiful sound you've ever heard layered into a single word. "Jonathan, do you know why I've brought you here?" I couldn't speak. I literally could not form words. I fell to my knees in the cold grass and I shook my head. "I've brought you here because March 2026 is a threshold," he said, "a point of no return for many, a moment of decision that will echo through eternity, and my people are asleep." The wind picked up as he spoke, and the wildflowers around us, dormant and brown in the February cold, began to move as if they were alive, as if they were responding to his words. "I need you to understand three things," Jesus continued, and he knelt down in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, his face inches from mine. "Three things that I am speaking over March 2026. Three things that will determine the trajectory of countless lives. Three things that most of my church will miss entirely because they're too comfortable, too distracted, too convinced they already know what I'm doing." I found my voice. "Barely." "What are the three things, Lord?" He stood, pulling me to my feet with him, and he turned to face the eastern horizon where the first hint of real dawn was beginning to show. "The first thing," he said, "is that March 2026 is a month of supernatural acceleration. What I have been preparing in secret for years will suddenly become visible. Callings that have been dormant will ignite. Gifts that have been buried will surface. People who have been in the wilderness will suddenly find themselves thrust into their purpose. But," and here his voice broke and fresh tears came, "but only for those who have remained faithful in the waiting, only for those who have not grown bitter in the delay, only for those who have continued to say yes even when they couldn't see the path." As he spoke, I saw it. I don't know how else to explain it except that I saw it like a vision overlaid on reality. I saw people, thousands of them, maybe millions, standing at a threshold. On one side, darkness and frustration and the same cycles they'd been trapped in for years. On the other side, light and purpose and the fullness of everything God had promised them. But here's what broke me. I saw that most of them didn't cross. Most of them stood at that threshold, looked at what was being offered, and turned back. Not because they didn't want it, not because they didn't believe God could do it, but because crossing required something they weren't willing to give. "What does it require, Lord?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What are they not willing to give?" "Their right to understand," he said. "Their need to have it all figured out before they move. Their insistence on comfort and certainty and the approval of others. Jonathan, the acceleration I'm releasing in March 2026 will feel like chaos to those who need control. It will look like foolishness to those who trust in human wisdom. It will be offensive to those who have built their identity on religious performance." The light around us was growing brighter, and I could now see the meadow clearly. The wildflowers, brown and dormant, stretched in every direction. But as Jesus spoke, I saw something impossible. I saw green shoots beginning to push through the dead stalks. I saw color beginning to emerge where there had been only brown. It was as if spring was coming in fast forward, as if the very ground was responding to his words. "Do you see this?" he asked, gesturing to the meadow. "This is what March 2026 represents, new life breaking through dead places. But it doesn't happen gradually, it happens suddenly. One day, dormant, the next day, alive. And those who are not prepared for the suddenness will miss it entirely. They'll still be mourning the winter while spring explodes around them." I was trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from the weight of what I was hearing, what I was seeing. "The second thing," Jesus continued, and his tone shifted, became more urgent, more intense, "is that March 2026 is a month of exposure. What has been hidden will be revealed. Secrets that have been buried will surface. Deception that has masqueraded as truth will be unmasked. And this will happen in every sphere, in government, in media, in business, in families, and yes, especially in my church." The wind became a roar, and the sky, which had been lightening with dawn, suddenly darkened again. Storm clouds rolled in from nowhere, and the temperature dropped even further. "There are leaders," he said, and his voice was like iron now, "who have used my name to build kingdoms for themselves. There are ministries that have become businesses. There are voices that claim to speak for me, but have not been in my presence in years. March 2026 will be the beginning of the great unveiling, and it will be devastating to those who have put their trust in personalities rather than in me. I saw it again. Another vision. I saw prominent figures, people whose names I recognized, whose ministries I'd followed, suddenly exposed. I saw scandals breaking. I saw financial corruption revealed. I saw moral failures coming to light. And I saw the devastation it caused, not just to the leaders themselves, but to the countless people who had built their faith on those leaders rather than on Christ. But then I saw something else. I saw other leaders, humble servants whose names I didn't recognize, suddenly being elevated. I saw God raising up voices from obscurity, people who had been faithful in small things, people who had no platform or following, but who carried his genuine presence and authority. The shaking is mercy, Jesus said, and his hand was on my shoulder again. It's mercy because I'm removing what can be shaken so that what cannot be shaken remains. But it will not feel like mercy to those who have invested everything in what's being shaken. I was weeping now too, weeping because I could feel the weight of what was coming, weeping because I knew people who would be affected, weeping because I could see how unprepared most of us are for this level of upheaval. And the third thing, Jesus said, and now his voice was tender again, filled with such love that it almost hurt to hear. The third thing is that March 2026 is a month of invitation. In the midst of the acceleration and the exposure, in the midst of the chaos and the shaking, I am extending an invitation to intimacy that most of my people have never experienced. I am calling them deeper. I am calling them closer. I am offering them access to my heart in ways that will ruin them for anything less. The storm clouds began to break, and shafts of golden sunlight pierced through, illuminating the meadow in ways that seemed almost supernatural. The wildflowers, which had been showing those impossible green shoots, were now in full bloom, colors I'd never seen before, fragrances that filled the air with something that smelled like heaven itself. But here's what breaks my heart, Jesus said, and he was weeping again, harder now. Here's what I need you to tell them. Most of my people will be so focused on the acceleration, on getting their breakthrough, their promotion, their miracle, that they'll miss the invitation to intimacy. Most will be so distracted by the exposure, by the scandals and the shaking and the drama, that they'll miss the invitation to intimacy. They'll be so busy analyzing what I'm doing that they'll miss the opportunity to simply be with me. He turned to face me fully, and he took both of my hands in his. Jonathan, I'm not looking for more workers. I have plenty of workers. I'm not looking for more performers or producers or people who can build big things in my name. I'm looking for friends. I'm looking for people who will sit with me in the garden. I'm looking for people who want me more than they want what I can do for them. The sun was fully up now, and the meadow was transformed. What had been dead and brown was now alive with color and life. But I knew, somehow I knew, that when I left this place, when I walked back down that dirt road, the meadow would return to its February dormancy. This was a vision, a prophetic picture, a glimpse of what was possible but not yet manifest. Tomorrow night, Jesus said, come back here, same time. There's more you need to understand. There's more you need to see. And Jonathan, he paused, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made me want to look away but couldn't. Not everyone will believe you. Not everyone will receive this. But you must share it anyway. You must be faithful to deliver the message, regardless of the response. Do you understand? I nodded, unable to speak. And then he was gone. The light faded. The transformed meadow returned to its winter state. And I was alone in the cold dawn, shaking and weeping and completely undone. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for the sun to fully rise, long enough for my body to register just how cold I was, long enough to question whether any of it had really happened or if I'd had some kind of breakdown. But I knew. Deep in my spirit, I knew it was real. I knew I'd been given a message that I had to share no matter what it cost me. So here I am sharing it with you. The first of three things Jesus told me about March 2026. It's a month of supernatural acceleration, but only for those who have remained faithful in the waiting. Tomorrow night, I'll share what happened during the second encounter, what Jesus revealed about the exposure that's coming and how to prepare for it, what he showed me about the specific areas where the shaking will be most intense. But right now, I need you to do something. I need you to ask yourself, have I remained faithful in the waiting? Or have I grown bitter, cynical, hard? Have I continued to say yes to God even when I couldn't see the path? Or have I pulled back, protected myself, settled for less? Because March 2026 is coming whether we're ready or not. And what Jesus made clear to me is that the acceleration he's releasing is not for everyone. It's for those who have prepared their hearts, who have stayed soft, who have refused to let disappointment turn into unbelief. Leave your prayer requests below. Subscribe if you're serious about hearing what God is saying right now, and come back tomorrow night for part 2. This is not a game. This is not entertainment. This is a genuine word from the Lord for such a time as this. You've been marked. The question is, what will you do with what you've heard? I barely slept on February 16th. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that meadow transformed. The impossible spring breaking through winter, the wildflowers blooming in colors that don't exist in our natural spectrum, and Jesus weeping over his people who would miss everything he was offering because they were too distracted, too comfortable, too convinced they already had it figured out. I spent the day in a fog. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to pray, but words felt inadequate. I tried to read scripture, but every passage seemed to point back to what I'd experienced in that meadow. I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that the stress of the past year had finally caught up with me, that I'd had some kind of psychological break. But I couldn't, because the encounter had been more real than anything I'd ever experienced, more real than this physical world, more real than my own thoughts and doubts. As the day wore on, I felt a growing sense of dread mixed with anticipation. Jesus had told me to return at the same time, 2:47 a.m. He'd said there was more I needed to understand, more I needed to see, and some part of me didn't want to go back. Some part of me wanted to stay in my comfortable ignorance, to not carry the weight of whatever else he was going to reveal. But a deeper part of me, the part that had been awakened by portraying Jesus on screen, the part that had tasted genuine encounter and could never be satisfied with religion again, that part couldn't wait to return. I arrived at the meadow at 2:35 a.m. on February 17th, 12 minutes early. The temperature had dropped even further. The weather report had said it was 28 degrees, but with the wind chill, it felt closer to 15. My breath came out in thick clouds. The sky was clear, and the stars were so bright and numerous that they cast actual shadows on the ground. I walked to the same spot where I'd stood the night before, to the center of the meadow where the land dipped slightly. The dried wildflower stalks crunched under my boots. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, and another answered from a different direction. The wind was gentler tonight, but steady, carrying that same indefinable scent I'd noticed before, earth and grass and something else, something that didn't belong to this world. I stood there, waiting, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I prayed, not eloquent prayers, just desperate ones. Jesus, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm ready, please help me understand. Help me carry whatever you're about to show me. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I know because I'd been checking my phone obsessively, the light came again. But this time it was different. This time it didn't start soft and build gradually. This time it exploded into existence, so bright and sudden that I actually cried out and fell backward, landing hard on the frozen ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare up at the light that was now directly above me, pulsing like a living thing. And then he was there, standing over me, reaching down to help me up. But his face, oh God, his face was different tonight. Last night he'd been weeping with sorrow. Tonight his expression was harder, more intense, and his eyes blazed with something that I can only describe as holy anger mixed with fierce love. "Stand up, Jonathan," he said, and his voice carried an authority that made my bones vibrate. "Stand up. What I'm about to show you requires you to be on your feet." He pulled me up with a strength that seemed effortless, and suddenly I wasn't cold anymore. The temperature hadn't changed. I could still see my breath, but I felt warm, almost hot, as if I was standing next to a fire. "Last night I told you about the acceleration," Jesus said, and he began to walk through the meadow, gesturing for me to follow. "Tonight I need you to understand the exposure. I need you to see what I'm about to unveil, and why it must happen, and how my people should respond when it does." As we walked, the meadow began to change again, but this time it wasn't transforming into spring. This time it was expanding, growing larger with each step, until it seemed to stretch for miles in every direction, and the dried wildflower stalks began to take on different forms. They became buildings, structures, institutions. I could see churches, ministry headquarters, media studios, government buildings, all formed from these dead, dried stalks. "Do you see this?" Jesus asked, and his voice was heavy with grief. Do you see what my people have built? Structures and systems and institutions all made from dead things, all impressive to look at, all carefully constructed, all completely devoid of genuine life. I stared at the landscape of dead stock buildings stretching in every direction, and I felt sick, because I recognized some of them. I could see specific ministries, specific churches, specific organizations that I'd supported, that I'd believed in, that I'd thought were doing God's work. But Lord, I said, my voice shaking, some of these places, they're doing good things. They're feeding the poor. They're preaching the gospel. Are they? He interrupted, and his tone was sharp. Or are they building kingdoms in my name? Are they truly seeking my face, or are they using my name to build their own platforms, their own influence, their own wealth? He stopped walking and turned to face me, and the intensity in his eyes made me want to look away, but I couldn't. Jonathan, I'm not against organization. I'm not against structure. I'm not against buildings or media or any tool that can be used to advance my kingdom. But when the tool becomes the focus, when the structure becomes more important than my presence, when maintaining the institution takes precedence over obeying my voice, that's when it becomes an idol. That's when it becomes something I must tear down. The wind picked up suddenly, violently, and the deadstock buildings began to shake. Some of them started to crack, to crumble, to collapse, and I heard sounds, screams, shouts, the chaos of people running, trying to hold things together, trying to save what was falling apart. March 2026, Jesus said, his voice cutting through the wind and chaos, is when I begin to shake these structures, not all at once, not everything simultaneously, but the shaking begins in March, and it will continue until only what I have built remains. I watched in horror as a massive deadstock cathedral, one I recognized, one that represented a denomination I'd grown up in, began to split down the middle. People were pouring out of it, some weeping, some angry, some looking lost and confused. Why, Lord? I asked, and I was weeping now. Why does it have to be this way? Why can't you just reform these places? Why can't you just fix what's broken? He turned to me, and his expression softened slightly. Because they won't let me, because they've become so invested in their own way of doing things that they can no longer hear my voice, because they've replaced intimacy with activity, presence with programs, and genuine power with performance. He gestured to another structure, this one a massive media complex made of dead stalks. Do you see this? This represents ministries that have become businesses. They started with genuine fire, genuine calling, genuine anointing. But somewhere along the way, they began to measure success by numbers instead of by transformation. They began to care more about views and likes and subscribers than about whether people were actually encountering me. As he spoke, I saw the structure begin to glow from within, but it wasn't the golden light of his presence. It was a sickly, greenish light, and I somehow knew it represented corruption, financial corruption, moral corruption, spiritual corruption. In March 2026, Jesus said, I'm going to expose this, not to destroy the people involved, but to free them, not to shame them, but to offer them a chance to return to their first love. But Jonathan, and here he gripped my shoulders, his face inches from mine, many of them won't take it. Many of them will double down. Many of them will attack the messengers who try to warn them. Many of them will call the exposure the enemy's attack when it's actually my mercy. The scene shifted, and suddenly we were standing on a slight rise in the meadow, looking down at a valley filled with thousands of these dead stock structures, and I could see cracks forming in all of them, some small, some large, but all of them showing signs of instability. The exposure will come in waves, Jesus explained. First, financial irregularities will surface, ministries that have been misusing funds, leaders who have been enriching themselves while their staff struggle. This will shock many people, but it's just the beginning. I saw it as he spoke. News reports, social media posts, investigative journalism pieces, all revealing financial scandals in major ministries. I saw the shock and betrayal on people's faces as leaders they'd trusted were exposed as frauds. Second, Jesus continued, moral failures will be revealed. Affairs, addictions, abuse that's been covered up for years. Leaders who have presented one face in public while living completely different lives in private. The vision shifted again, and I saw prominent pastors, worship leaders, Christian celebrities being exposed for hidden sin. I saw the devastation it caused. Marriages destroyed, churches split, faith shattered for those who had built their belief on personalities rather than on Christ himself. And third, Jesus said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, doctrinal deception will be unmasked. teachings that have led my people astray, theologies that have been built on human wisdom rather than on my word, movements that have mixed truth with just enough error to poison the whole thing. I saw churches and movements that I'd thought were solid, that I'd thought were preaching the gospel, suddenly revealed to be teaching something else entirely. Prosperity gospel taken to extremes, grace twisted into license, social justice divorced from personal holiness, political ideology masquerading as biblical truth. Lord, this is going to devastate people, I said, my voice breaking. This is going to destroy faith for so many. No, he said firmly. It's going to destroy false faith. It's going to destroy faith that was built on sand instead of on rock. It's going to destroy faith that was placed in people instead of in me. And yes, that will be painful. Yes, that will feel like devastation. But Jonathan, I cannot build on a faulty foundation. I cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. The shaking must come so that what remains is genuine. The wind was howling now, and the dead stock structures were collapsing all around us. But I noticed something. There were some structures that weren't shaking. They were few, scattered among the thousands of collapsing buildings, but they stood firm. And they weren't made of dead stalks. They were made of living wood, green and growing, with roots that went deep into the ground. Do you see those? Jesus asked, pointing to the stable structures. Those represent ministries and churches and individual believers who have built on me, who have prioritized my presence over their programs, who have remained humble and teachable and dependent on my spirit. The shaking won't touch them. In fact, the shaking will cause them to grow stronger, because people who are displaced from the collapsing structures will be looking for something real, something solid, something that can withstand the storm. He turned to face me again, and his expression was intense. This is what I need you to tell them, Jonathan. This is what I need you to make clear. The exposure that's coming in March 2026 is not the end. It's not judgment in the sense of final condemnation. It's correction. It's mercy. It's me loving my people enough to remove what's hindering them from experiencing all I have for them. But how do we prepare? I asked desperately. How do we make sure we're not part of what's being shaken? How do we know if we've built on rock or on sand? Jesus smiled for the first time that night, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. You ask me. You come into my presence and you let me search your heart. You stop defending yourself, stop justifying yourself, stop comparing yourself to others. You get brutally honest about where you've compromised, where you've settled, where you've chosen comfort over obedience. The scene around us began to fade, and we were back in the simple meadow, just the two of us standing in the cold February night under the brilliant stars. There are specific areas, Jesus said, where the exposure will be most intense. I need you to understand these so you can warn my people. He held up one finger. First, celebrity Christianity, the cult of personality that has infected my church, the elevation of gifted speakers and talented musicians and charismatic leaders to a place that belongs to me alone. In March 2026, I'm going to topple these idols, not because I don't love the people involved, but because I love them too much to let them continue in deception. He held up a second finger. Second, the prosperity gospel and its various mutations. The teaching that I'm a cosmic vending machine, that faith is a formula for getting what you want, that blessing is always measured in material terms. This has poisoned my church, and in March 2026, I'm going to expose it for the lie it is. A third finger. Third, political Christianity. The merging of my kingdom with earthly political movements. The belief that the answer to spiritual problems is political power. The compromise of my message to gain influence in worldly systems. I'm going to make it very clear that my kingdom is not of this world, and those who have confused the two will face a reckoning. A fourth finger. Fourth, performance-based Christianity. The exhausting treadmill of trying to earn my love through activity, the belief that busyness equals faithfulness, the substitution of doing for being. I'm going to break this yoke off my people's necks, but the breaking will be painful for those who have built their entire identity on their performance. And finally, a fifth finger. Fifth, comfortable Christianity, the version of faith that requires nothing, costs nothing, changes nothing. The belief that you can follow me without taking up your cross, that you can be my disciple without dying to yourself, that you can experience my power without surrendering your control. This is perhaps the most pervasive deception in the Western Church, and it must be exposed. I was trembling, overwhelmed by the scope of what he was describing. Lord, if all of this is exposed, if all of this is shaken, what will be left? His smile widened, and his eyes filled with joy. Everything that matters, a church that looks like the book of Acts, believers who are actually willing to lay down their lives for me, communities that are marked by genuine love instead of religious performance, a people who carry my presence instead of just talking about it. Jonathan, what's coming after the shaking is glorious beyond anything you can imagine, but we can't get to the glory without going through the shaking. The light around us began to dim, and I knew our time was almost up, but I had one more question, one that had been burning in my heart since the visions began. Lord, what about me? What about my own life, my own ministry, my own heart? Am I building on rock or on sand? Am I part of what you're going to shake? He stepped closer and placed his hand over my heart. That's why I chose you to carry this message, Jonathan, because you're willing to ask that question, because you're more afraid of being wrong than you are of being criticized, because you've tasted enough of the real thing that you can't go back to pretending. He paused, and his expression became serious. But yes, there are areas in your life that I'm going to shake. There are places where you've compromised without realizing it. There are ways you've begun to trust in the platform more than in me. And in March 2026, you're going to experience your own personal shaking. It won't be public like what I'm going to do with others, but it will be deep. And it will either make you or break you, depending on how you respond. I felt fear grip my chest. What do I need to do? How do I prepare? Come back tomorrow night, he said. Same time, same place. I'll show you the third thing, the invitation to intimacy that most will miss because they're too focused on the acceleration and too distracted by the exposure. I'll show you how to not just survive what's coming, but to thrive in it. I'll show you the secret that will make all the difference. And then he was gone. The light faded. The meadow returned to its winter dormancy, and I was alone again, shaking from more than just the cold, weeping from more than just emotion. I walked back to my car as dawn began to break, and I noticed something I hadn't seen on the way in. There were fresh tracks in the frost-covered grass, not animal tracks, human tracks, leading to the exact spot where I'd been standing, and then leading away again. But I'd been alone. I'd seen no one else, unless the encounter had been more than just spiritual, unless Jesus had been physically present in that meadow, walking with me, standing with me, leaving actual footprints in the frost. I fell to my knees right there, on the dirt road leading out of the meadow, and I wept. Because if he was that real, if he was that present, if he cared that much about warning his people, then everything he'd shown me was true. All of it. The acceleration, the exposure, the shaking, the glory that would come after, and I had to share it no matter what it cost me. So here I am, sharing it with you. The second thing Jesus told me about March 2026, it's a month when exposure begins, when what's been hidden will be revealed, when structures built on sand will start to crumble, when idols will be toppled, when deception will be unmasked, and it's going to be painful, it's going to be shocking, it's going to shake everything that can be shaken, but it's mercy, it's love, it's God refusing to let his people continue in deception and compromise. The question is, how will you respond when the exposure comes? Will you defend the structures that are falling? Will you attack the messengers who try to warn you? Will you call it the enemy's attack when it's actually God's correction? Or will you humble yourself? Will you let him search your heart? Will you be willing to have your own foundations examined, even if it means discovering you've built on sand in some areas? Tomorrow night, I'll share the third encounter, the invitation to intimacy that changes everything. The secret to not just surviving what's coming, but thriving in it. But right now, I need you to do something. I need you to get alone with God and ask him this question. Lord, is there anything in my life that you're going to shake? Is there any area where I've built on sand instead of rock? Is there any place where I've compromised without realizing it? And then listen, really listen. Don't defend yourself. Don't justify yourself. Just listen. Leave your prayer requests in the comments. Subscribe if you're serious about hearing the rest of this message, and prepare your heart for what's coming, because March 2026 is closer than you think, and the shaking is going to separate the real from the counterfeit, the genuine from the performance, the rock from the sand. You've been marked. You've been warned. Now the question is, what will you do with what you've heard? February 18th, 2026 was the longest day of my life. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. I couldn't do anything except replay the previous 2 nights in my mind over and over again. The acceleration, the exposure, the shaking that was coming, the structures collapsing, the idols being toppled, and Jesus weeping one night, blazing with holy intensity the next. But it was his final words from the second night that haunted me most. There are areas in your life that I'm going to shake. It will either make you or break you depending on how you respond. I spent the day in what I can only describe as holy terror. Not the fear that drives you away from God, but the fear that drives you toward Him. The fear that makes you desperate to get right, to be clean, to be ready for whatever's coming. I went through my life with brutal honesty. My finances, was I trusting in money or in God? My platform, was I using it for His glory or my own? My relationships, was I loving people or using them? My ministry, was I serving Jesus or serving my own ambition? My prayer life, was it genuine intimacy or religious performance? And I found things. God, I found things. Compromises I'd made without realizing it. Areas where I'd begun to trust in the platform more than in His presence. Moments where I'd chosen comfort over obedience. Ways I'd protected my reputation instead of speaking truth. Places where I'd grown comfortable, complacent, lukewarm. By the time 2:47 a.m. approached, I was wrecked, completely undone. I'd spent hours in repentance, in tears, in desperate prayer, and I was terrified of what Jesus was going to show me on this third night, terrified that He was going to expose even more, terrified that I wasn't going to measure up, terrified that I was part of what He was going to shake. But I went anyway, because at this point not going was more terrifying than going. The temperature had risen slightly. It was 35 degrees instead of the brutal cold of the previous nights. But the wind was stronger, gusting hard enough to make me stagger as I walked into the meadow. The sky was different tonight, too. Clouds were rolling in from the west, thick and dark, and they were moving fast, racing across the sky like they were being chased by something. I reached the center of the meadow at 2:40 a.m., 7 minutes early, and I didn't wait standing up this time. I fell to my knees immediately, my face to the ground, and I cried out, "Jesus, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to carry this message. I'm not worthy to be in your presence. I'm not worthy of anything you've shown me, but I'm here. I'm desperate. I'm broken, and I need you more than I need my next breath." The wind howled around me, and I heard thunder in the distance. A storm was coming, a big one. And some part of me knew that this was intentional, that the natural storm was a reflection of the spiritual intensity of what was about to happen. At exactly 2:47 a.m., everything went silent. The wind stopped. The thunder ceased. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed to disappear. It was as if all of creation was holding its breath, waiting. And then the light came. But this time it was different from both previous nights. This time it didn't gradually build or suddenly explode. This time it descended like a pillar of fire from heaven, landing directly on the spot where I was kneeling, surrounding me, penetrating me, filling me with a heat and a power and a presence so intense that I thought I was going to die. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely think. I was aware of nothing except the overwhelming reality of His presence, the weight of His glory, the magnitude of His holiness. And then I heard His voice, but it wasn't coming from outside me. It was coming from within me, from the deepest part of my spirit, resonating through every cell of my body. "Jonathan, stand up and look at me." I don't know how I managed it, but I stood. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stay upright, but I stood, and I lifted my eyes. Jesus was standing directly in front of me, but He looked different tonight. He was radiant, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within Him, and His eyes were like flames of fire, burning with an intensity that should have terrified me, but instead filled me with a longing so deep, it was almost painful. "Do you know why I've brought you here for a third night?" He asked, and His voice was tender now, intimate, like a lover speaking to his beloved. I shook my head, unable to form words. "Because everything I've shown you, the acceleration, the exposure, the shaking, all of it is secondary. All of it is just the context for what I really want to give my people. All of it is just the preparation for the invitation I'm extending." He stepped closer, and the light around us intensified. The meadow was transforming again, but this time it wasn't becoming spring or expanding into a landscape of structures. This time it was becoming something else entirely. The wildflowers were blooming, but they were glowing from within, pulsing with light. The sky above us was opening, and I could see into the heavenly realm, angels and elders and living creatures, all focused on this moment, all watching what was happening in this meadow. "Jonathan, the third thing I need you to understand about March 2026 is this. It's a month of invitation, an invitation to a level of intimacy with me that most of my people have never experienced, an invitation to friendship, to partnership, to union with me that goes beyond anything religion has taught them. As he spoke, the scene around us shifted, and I saw something that broke me completely. I saw the church, not buildings or institutions, but the actual people of God, and I saw them in two groups. The first group was massive, stretching as far as I could see. They were busy, active, running from one thing to another. They were doing ministry, attending services, reading their Bibles, praying prayers, posting on social media about their faith. They were good people, sincere people, people who genuinely believed they were serving God. But as I watched them, I realized something that made my heart sink. They were doing all of this at a distance from Jesus. They were working for him, but not with him. They were serving him, but not knowing him. They were busy with the things of God, but they had no intimacy with the God of those things. And Jesus was standing among them, reaching out to them, calling to them, but they were too busy to notice, too distracted by their activities to see that he was right there, longing for their attention, longing for their presence, longing for them to stop doing and just be with him. The second group was much smaller, tiny actually, compared to the first. But they were different. They weren't running around. They weren't frantically busy. They were simply sitting at Jesus' feet, gazing at him, listening to him, communing with him, and the light that radiated from them was blinding. They glowed with his presence. They carried his authority. They moved with his power, not because they were trying to, but because they had been with him. "Do you see the difference?" Jesus asked, and his voice was heavy with emotion. "Do you see what I'm longing for? I don't need more workers, Jonathan. I have plenty of people willing to work for me. What I need, what I'm desperate for, are friends. People who want me more than they want to do things for me. People who would rather sit in my presence than build ministries in my name. People who understand that intimacy with me is not a luxury for the super spiritual, but the foundation for everything else." I was weeping uncontrollably now because I saw myself in that first group. I saw all the ways I'd been busy for God while neglecting God himself, all the ways I'd prioritized ministry over intimacy, all the ways I'd chosen activity over presence. "Lord," I choked out, "I've been so blind. I've been so foolish. I've had the privilege of portraying you on screen, of spending hours studying your words and your character, and yet I've still kept you at arm's length. I've still treated you like a boss instead of a friend. I've still been more concerned with doing things for you than with simply being with you." He smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "I know, Jonathan. I know. But that's why I've brought you here. That's why I've shown you these things. Because in March 2026, I'm extending an invitation to my entire church, but especially to those who have been busy for me while neglecting me. I'm inviting them to stop, to rest, to come away with me, to discover what it means to abide in me, not just to work for me." The storm clouds that had been gathering suddenly broke, and rain began to fall. But it wasn't normal rain. It was warm, almost hot, and where it touched the glowing wildflowers, they burst into even brighter light. Where it touched the ground, the earth seemed to come alive, pulsing with energy. "This is what the intimacy I'm offering looks like," Jesus said, gesturing to the rain. "It's not passive, it's not inactive, it's not lazy, but it flows from being with me, not from striving for me. It's the fruit of abiding, not the result of effort. And Jonathan, the people who accept this invitation in March 2026, the people who choose intimacy over activity, presence over performance, they're going to be the ones who carry the next great move of my spirit. They're going to be the ones who see the miracles, who experience the breakthrough, who walk in the authority that the first group is desperately trying to achieve through their own efforts." He turned and began walking through the meadow, and I followed. The rain was soaking us both, but I didn't care. I would have followed him anywhere at that moment. "Let me show you what happens when my people miss this invitation," he said, and his tone became somber. The scene shifted, and I saw the first group again, the busy, active, sincere believers. But now I was seeing them in March 2026 and beyond. I saw them experiencing the acceleration I'd been shown on the first night, receiving their breakthroughs, stepping into their callings, and at first it looked good. It looked like success. They were building bigger ministries, reaching more people, seeing more results. But then I saw what was happening beneath the surface. I saw them burning out. I saw them becoming exhausted, depleted, empty. I saw them achieving their dreams but losing their souls in the process. I saw them gaining the whole world but forfeiting the one thing that mattered most, intimacy with Jesus. And I saw Jesus weeping over them just like he'd wept on the first night, because they had everything he wanted to give them except the one thing he wanted most to give them, himself. "This is what breaks my heart," Jesus said, and tears were streaming down his face again. "This is what I'm trying to prevent. I'm about to release an acceleration of calling and purpose and breakthrough like my church hasn't seen in generations. But if they step into that acceleration without first accepting the invitation to intimacy, it will destroy them. They'll burn out, they'll fall into sin, they'll build in their own strength, and then wonder why it all feels empty. But those who accept the invitation first," he continued, and now his face lit up with joy, "those who prioritize intimacy over activity, who learn to abide before they learn to achieve, they'll step into the acceleration from a place of rest. They'll walk in authority because they've been with me. They'll see miracles because they carry my presence. They'll build things that last because they're building with me, not just for me." He stopped walking and turned to face me, placing both hands on my shoulders. "Jonathan, this is the most important thing I need you to communicate. More important than the acceleration, more important than the exposure. This invitation to intimacy, this is everything. This is what March 2026 is really about. Everything else is just preparation for this." The rain was falling harder now, and lightning was flashing in the clouds above us, but it wasn't frightening. It was glorious, like creation itself was celebrating what was being spoken. "There are specific things I need you to tell them," Jesus said. "Specific instructions for how to accept this invitation. Are you ready to hear them?" I nodded, pulling out my phone to take notes, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "First," he said, "they must create space. They cannot accept an invitation to intimacy if their lives are so full of activity that there's no room for me. They must ruthlessly eliminate the non-essential. They must say no to good things so they can say yes to the best thing. They must carve out time, real time, not just leftover time, to be with me." I was typing frantically, trying to capture every word. "Second, they must come with expectation. Too many of my people spend time in my presence out of duty, not desire. They show up because they're supposed to, not because they're desperate to. But intimacy requires hunger. It requires expectation. It requires believing that I actually want to meet with them, that I have things to say to them, that I delight in their presence as much as I want them to delight in mine." Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath our feet. "Third, they must be willing to be vulnerable. Real intimacy requires honesty. It requires bringing me their real thoughts, their real struggles, their real doubts and fears and failures. Too many of my people try to clean themselves up before they come to me, but that's not intimacy. That's performance. I want them raw, real, unfiltered. I want them to stop pretending and start being honest. Fourth, they must learn to listen. Intimacy is not a monologue, it's a dialogue. But most of my people do all the talking and none of the listening. They bring me their prayer lists and their requests and their concerns, and then they leave before I can respond. They must learn to be still, to wait, to listen for my voice, which often comes as a whisper, not a shout. The rain was beginning to slow, and the clouds were starting to break apart, revealing stars beyond them. Fifth, they must prioritize my presence over my presence. They must want me more than they want what I can do for them. They must come to me, not because they need something, but because they need me. This is the hardest thing for most of my people to understand, because they've been taught that I'm a problem solver, a need meter, a blessing giver, and I am all those things, but I'm so much more. I'm a friend. I'm a lover. I'm someone who wants to be wanted for who I am, not just for what I can provide. He paused, and his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me feel like he was looking into the deepest parts of my soul. And sixth, they must understand that intimacy with me will cost them everything and give them everything. It will cost them their reputation because people who are truly intimate with me stop caring what others think. It will cost them their comfort because I'll call them to things that terrify them. It will cost them their control because intimacy requires surrender. But Jonathan, what they gain is worth infinitely more than what they lose. They gain me. They gain my presence. They gain access to my heart, my mind, my power, my authority. They gain the one thing that will satisfy their souls and fulfill their purpose. The rain had stopped completely now, and the clouds had parted, revealing the most spectacular display of stars I'd ever seen. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and shooting stars were streaking across the heavens in numbers that seemed impossible. This is what intimacy with me looks like, Jesus said, gesturing to the sky. Glorious, vast, beautiful beyond description. But most of my people are so busy looking down at their tasks and their to-do lists that they never look up to see what I'm offering them. He turned back to me, and his expression became urgent. Jonathan, March 2026 is the invitation, but it's not the only opportunity. I'm always inviting my people into deeper intimacy. I'm always calling them to come away with me. But March 2026 is a special moment, a kairos moment, when the veil between heaven and earth is thinner, when my presence is more accessible, when the invitation is being extended with unusual clarity and power. Those who accept the invitation in March will find that everything else I've promised, the acceleration, the breakthrough, the calling, the purpose, flows naturally from the intimacy. They won't have to strive for it. They won't have to manufacture it. It will be the fruit of abiding in me. But those who ignore the invitation, who are so focused on the acceleration that they miss the intimacy, who are so distracted by the exposure and the shaking that they don't hear me calling them to come away, they'll struggle, they'll strive, they'll burn out, and they'll miss the very thing their souls are longing for. The light around us was beginning to fade, and I knew our time was almost up. But I had to ask one more question. Lord, what about the people who feel like they're not worthy of this kind of intimacy with you? What about the people who feel like they've failed too many times, sinned too much, disappointed you too often? What do I tell them? His smile was radiant. You tell them that's exactly why I'm inviting them. You tell them that intimacy with me is not a reward for good behavior. It's the source of transformation. You tell them that I don't wait for them to get cleaned up before I invite them close. I invite them close so they can be cleaned up. You tell them that the invitation is not based on their worthiness, but on my love. And my love is not conditional. It's not earned. It's freely given to anyone who will receive it. He pulled me into an embrace, and I felt the full weight of his love, his acceptance, his delight in me despite all my failures and flaws. And I wept like a child because I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn what he was freely offering. Go, he whispered in my ear. Go and tell them. Tell them about the acceleration. Tell them about the exposure. But most of all, tell them about the invitation. Tell them that I'm waiting for them. Tell them that I'm longing for them. Tell them that the thing they've been searching for in ministry and activity and achievement is found in one place only, in intimate communion with me. And then he was gone. The light faded. The glowing wildflowers returned to their dormant state. The spectacular sky returned to normal, and I was alone in the meadow, soaked from the rain, shaking from the encounter, completely undone by what I'd experienced. But this time I didn't feel alone, because something had shifted inside me. Something had broken open. The barrier I'd maintained between myself and Jesus, the distance I'd kept even while portraying him on screen, the walls I'd built to protect myself, they were gone, shattered, demolished. And in their place was a hunger, a desperation, a longing for his presence that I'd never experienced before. I walked back to my car as dawn began to break, and I knew that my life would never be the same. I knew that I could never go back to busy Christianity, to activity without intimacy, to serving him from a distance. I'd been invited into something deeper, something richer, something that would cost me everything and give me everything. And I'd said yes. The question is, will you? Because March 2026 is coming. The acceleration is coming. The exposure is coming. The shaking is coming. But more importantly, the invitation is coming. An invitation to intimacy with Jesus that goes beyond anything you've experienced before. An invitation to friendship, to partnership, to union with him that will transform everything. And you have a choice. You can ignore the invitation and focus on the acceleration, trying to achieve breakthrough through your own efforts. You can get distracted by the exposure, spending all your energy analyzing what God is doing instead of being with the God who's doing it. Or you can accept the invitation, you can create space, you can come with expectation, you can be vulnerable. You can learn to listen. You can prioritize his presence over his presence. You can pay the cost and receive the reward. Tomorrow I'll share the final part, the practical steps, the specific challenge, the urgent timeline. I'll tell you exactly what you need to do to prepare for March 2026 and how to position yourself to receive everything God is offering. But tonight I need you to do something. I need you to get alone with Jesus and ask him this question. Lord, will you invite me into deeper intimacy with you? Will you show me what it means to abide in you, not just work for you? Will you teach me to be your friend, not just your servant? and then wait. Listen, be still, and let him respond, because he's waiting for you. He's longing for you. And the invitation is extended. Leave your prayer requests in the comments. Subscribe if you're serious about accepting this invitation, and prepare your heart for the final part tomorrow. You've been marked, you've been warned, you've been invited. Now the question is, what will you do? I didn't go back to the meadow on February 19th, not because Jesus told me not to, not because the encounters were complete, but because I physically couldn't. My body had reached its limit. 3 nights of supernatural encounters, 3 nights of standing in the presence of the living God, 3 nights of receiving revelation that shook everything I thought I understood. It had taken a toll that I wasn't prepared for. I slept for 14 hours straight, and when I woke up, I was different, fundamentally, irreversibly different. The best way I can describe it is this. It was like I'd been living my entire life in black and white, and suddenly everything was in color. Like I'd been hearing music through cheap earbuds, and suddenly I was in a concert hall with perfect acoustics. Like I'd been tasting food with a dulled palate, and suddenly every flavor was sharp and clear and intense. Jesus had said that intimacy with him would cost me everything and give me everything. I was beginning to understand what he meant. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about those 3 nights, the acceleration, the exposure, the invitation. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I'd been given not just a message to share, but a responsibility to help people prepare. Because here's what became crystal clear to me. March 2026 is less than 2 weeks away as I'm recording this, less than 2 weeks until the acceleration begins, less than 2 weeks until the exposure starts, less than 2 weeks until the invitation is extended with unusual clarity and power, and most of God's people have no idea what's coming. They're going about their normal routines, their normal church activities, their normal Christian lives, completely unaware that everything is about to shift. So on February 22nd, I went back to the meadow one final time, not at 2:47 a.m., not in the darkness, but at noon in the full light of day. I needed to see it again, to walk through it again, to remember what had happened there, and to ask God for wisdom about how to help his people prepare. The meadow looked so ordinary in the daylight, just dried wildflower stalks and brown grass, stretching between 2 low hills. No glowing flowers, no pillar of fire, no visible presence of Jesus, just a normal meadow on a normal February day. But as I stood there in the center, in the exact spot where I'd encountered him 3 times, I felt his presence just as strongly as I had in the supernatural encounters. Maybe even more strongly, because now I understood something I hadn't before. He's always present, always available, always inviting us into intimacy. The supernatural encounters were meant to wake me up to a reality that's always been true. I knelt in the brown grass and I prayed, Jesus, you've given me this message, you've shown me these things, you've commanded me to share them, but I need your wisdom. I need to know how to help people prepare. I need to know what practical steps they should take. I need to know how to make this real for them, not just theoretical. And as I prayed, the answers came, not in an audible voice, not in a vision, but in that still small voice that you learn to recognize when you've spent time in his presence. Clear, specific, practical. This is what he showed me. This is what I'm supposed to share with you. First, you need to understand the timeline. Today is February 15th, 2026, as I'm sharing this message with you. March 2026 begins in exactly 2 weeks. That means you have 14 days to prepare, 14 days to position yourself, 14 days to make the choices that will determine whether you experience the acceleration, survive the exposure, and accept the invitation, or whether you miss it all entirely. I know that sounds dramatic. I know some of you are thinking, Jonathan, you're being too intense. You're creating unnecessary urgency. God's grace doesn't work on deadlines. But here's what I learned in that meadow. God's grace is constant, but his kairos moments are not. There are appointed times, specific seasons when heaven touches earth in unusual ways, when the veil is thinner, when breakthrough is more accessible, when transformation is accelerated. March 2026 is one of those moments, and if you miss it, you won't miss salvation, but you will miss an opportunity that may not come again in your lifetime. So here's what you need to do. Here's the practical, specific, step-by-step challenge that Jesus gave me to share with you. The 30-minute daily challenge. Starting today, not tomorrow, not next week, but today, you need to commit to spending 30 minutes every single day in intimate communion with Jesus. Not Bible study, though that's valuable, not intercessory prayer, though that's important, not worship music in the background while you do other things, though that has its place, I'm talking about 30 minutes of focused, undistracted, face-to-face time with Jesus. 30 minutes where you shut off your phone, close your laptop, turn off the TV, and eliminate every possible distraction. 30 minutes where you come into his presence with no agenda except to be with him. Here's specifically what those 30 minutes should look like. Minutes 1 to 5, silence and stillness. You start by being completely silent. No words, no prayers, no worship songs, just silence. You sit or kneel or lie face down, and you focus on the reality of his presence. You remind yourself that he is there with you, that he delights in you, that he's been waiting for this moment. This will be the hardest 5 minutes of your day at first. Your mind will race. You'll think of 1,000 things you need to do. You'll feel restless, anxious, uncomfortable. That's normal. That's your flesh resisting what your spirit desperately needs. Push through it. Stay silent. Stay still. Minutes 6 to 10. Honest confession. After 5 minutes of silence, you begin to talk to Jesus with complete honesty, not the sanitized religious version of honesty, real honesty. You tell him about your doubts, your fears, your sins, your struggles, your disappointments, your anger, your confusion. You hold nothing back. You confess the ways you've been busy for him while neglecting him. You confess the ways you've treated him like a boss instead of a friend. You confess the ways you've wanted his blessings more than you've wanted him. You confess the ways you've compromised, settled, grown lukewarm. And here's the key. You don't rush through this. You don't just rattle off a list and move on. You sit with each confession. You let him respond. You receive his forgiveness, his grace, his love. Minutes 11-20, listening prayer. This is the most important part, and it's the part most Christians never do. After you've been honest with him, you ask him a simple question. Jesus, what do you want to say to me today? And then you wait. You listen. You pay attention to the thoughts that come, the impressions you sense, the scriptures that surface in your mind, the pictures you see in your imagination. You write down what you hear, even if it doesn't make sense at first, even if you're not sure it's really him. At first, you might not hear anything. That's okay. Keep showing up. Keep listening, because Jesus promised that his sheep hear his voice, and if you're his sheep, you will hear him. It might take days or weeks of practice, but you will hear him. Minutes 21-25, worship and adoration. After listening, you respond with worship. Not singing necessarily, though you can if you want to, but worship in the truest sense, telling Jesus who he is, what he means to you, why you love him. You focus on his character, his nature, his attributes. You thank him not for what he's done, but for who he is. You might say things like, Jesus, you are faithful, you are kind, you are patient with me, you are beautiful, you are worthy of everything I have to give. You are better than anything this world offers. You are enough. Minutes 26-30, surrender and commitment. You end by surrendering the day to him. You tell him that you're available for whatever he wants to do through you. You commit to obeying whatever he's spoken to you during your time together. You ask him to help you carry his presence into every interaction, every decision, every moment of your day. And then you sit in silence for one more minute, just resting in his presence, letting his peace settle over you before you re-enter the noise and chaos of normal life. That's it, 30 minutes, every single day, from now until March 31st, 2026, which gives you 45 days total if you start today. I know what some of you are thinking. Jonathan, I don't have 30 minutes. I have kids, I have a job, I have responsibilities. I can barely find 5 minutes in my day. Let me be blunt. That's a lie. You have 30 minutes. You just don't prioritize it. You find time to scroll social media. You find time to watch Netflix. You find time to do 100 things that are far less important than intimate communion with the God of the universe. If you can't find 30 minutes for Jesus, then you need to hear this hard truth. You're not serious about your faith. You're playing at Christianity. You're going through the motions. And when March 2026 comes, when the acceleration is released and the exposure begins and the invitation is extended, you're going to miss it. Not because God doesn't love you, not because you're not saved, but because you weren't prepared, because you didn't create space, because you chose everything else over the one thing that matters most. I'm not saying this to condemn you. I'm saying it to wake you up, because I love you too much to let you miss what God is offering. Now, beyond the 30-minute daily challenge, there are specific things you need to do to prepare for each of the 3 things Jesus showed me. Preparing for the acceleration. If you want to experience the supernatural acceleration that's coming in March 2026, you need to do 3 things. First, you need to identify and repent of any bitterness you're carrying from past disappointments. Jesus was very clear about this. The acceleration is only for those who have remained faithful in the waiting, who haven't grown bitter in the delay. If you're harboring resentment toward God because He didn't answer your prayers the way you wanted, because He didn't come through when you expected, because you've been waiting longer than you think is fair, you need to deal with that now. You need to forgive God. I know that sounds strange, but it's real. You need to release Him from your expectations and trust that His timing is perfect, even when you don't understand it. Second, you need to get clear on what God has actually called you to do, not what you think you should do, not what others expect you to do, not what seems practical or safe or reasonable, but what God has specifically spoken to you about your purpose, your calling, your assignment. If you're not clear on this, then spend your 30 minutes asking Him to reveal it, and when He does, write it down, declare it, begin to move toward it, even if you can't see the whole path yet. Third, you need to eliminate everything in your life that's not essential to your calling. Jesus said that the acceleration will feel like chaos to those who need control. The only way to navigate it is to simplify your life now. Cut out the commitments that are draining you. Say no to the opportunities that aren't aligned with your purpose. Create margin so that when God suddenly opens doors, you have the capacity to walk through them. Preparing for the exposure. If you want to survive and even thrive during the exposure that's coming in March 2026, you need to do three things. First, you need to examine your own life with brutal honesty. Ask the Holy Spirit to search your heart and reveal any area where you've compromised, where you've been living in secret sin, where you've been presenting one face in public while living differently in private, and then deal with it, confess it, repent of it, get it into the light before God exposes it, because I promise you anything that's hidden will be revealed, and it's far better to voluntarily bring it into the light than to have it forcibly exposed. Second, you need to stop building your faith on personalities. If your faith is dependent on a particular pastor, teacher, worship leader, or Christian celebrity, you're in danger, because many of these people are going to be exposed in March 2026 and beyond. And if your faith is built on them rather than on Jesus, the exposure will devastate you. So start now. Shift your focus from people to Jesus. Appreciate godly leaders, yes. Learn from them, yes. But don't make them your foundation. Third, you need to prepare to be a safe place for people who are going to be hurt by the exposure. When prominent leaders fall, when ministries collapse, when scandals break, there are going to be countless people who are confused, hurt, angry, and questioning everything. They're going to need someone who can point them back to Jesus, who can help them rebuild their faith on the right foundation. You need to be that person, which means you need to be grounded yourself, rooted in intimacy with Jesus, secure in your own relationship with Him. Preparing for the invitation. If you want to accept the invitation to intimacy that Jesus is extending in March 2026, you need to do three things. First, you need to cultivate hunger. You need to get desperate for His presence. You need to reach a place where you want Him more than you want anything else, more than breakthrough, more than blessing, more than success, more than comfort. How do you cultivate this hunger? By tasting His presence, by spending time with Him, by experiencing even small moments of genuine intimacy and realizing that nothing else compares. The 30-minute daily challenge will do this if you're faithful to it. Second, you need to deal with any shame or unworthiness you're carrying. Jesus was clear. The invitation is not based on your worthiness, but on His love. But if you don't believe that, if you're still trying to earn His affection, if you're still disqualifying yourself because of your past, you won't be able to receive the intimacy He's offering. So you need to renew your mind with the truth of who you are in Christ. You need to meditate on scriptures about His unconditional love. You need to let Him speak His affection over you until you believe it. Third, you need to be willing to pay the cost. Intimacy with Jesus will cost you your reputation, your comfort, your control. It will make you look foolish to people who don't understand. It will require you to say no to things that everyone else thinks are important. It will demand that you surrender areas of your life that you've been holding back. You need to count the cost and decide now that He's worth it. Because if you're not willing to pay the price, you won't accept the invitation when it comes. Now, I need to tell you something that Jesus made very clear to me. There's a deadline on this preparation, March 31st, 2026. That's 45 days from today. That's the end of the month when the acceleration, exposure, and invitation are being released with unusual intensity. I'm not saying that after March 31st, God's grace runs out or that you can never experience these things. But I am saying that there's a specific window of opportunity that's opening in March 2026, and if you're not prepared when it opens, you're going to miss it. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been invited to a wedding. The invitation specifies a date and time. You can show up prepared, dressed appropriately, ready to celebrate, or you can show up unprepared, in the wrong clothes, not ready for what's happening, or you can not show up at all. The wedding is going to happen regardless, but your experience of it depends entirely on whether you prepared and whether you showed up. March 2026 is the wedding. The question is, are you going to be ready? Let me tell you what happened to me after those 3 nights in the meadow. Let me tell you how my life has changed in just the few days since those encounters. I started doing the 30-minute daily challenge immediately, and at first, it was exactly as hard as I expected. The silence was uncomfortable. My mind raced. I felt restless and anxious. I wasn't sure I was hearing anything from God, but I kept showing up. Every single day, same time, same place in my home where I could be alone and undistracted. And slowly, things began to shift. The silence became less uncomfortable and more peaceful. My mind began to settle. I started to sense his presence in ways I never had before, and I began to hear his voice, not audibly but clearly, thoughts that weren't my own thoughts, impressions that carried weight and authority, scriptures that spoke directly to my situation. And the more time I spent with him, the more everything else in my life began to change. Relationships that had been strained began to heal. Decisions that had been confusing became clear. Fears that had been paralyzing began to lose their power, not because my circumstances changed, but because I was changing, because I was being transformed by his presence. I also started to notice things that needed to go, commitments I'd made that weren't aligned with my calling, relationships that were draining me without producing fruit, habits that were stealing my time and energy, activities that looked good on the surface but were actually distractions from what God was calling me to do, and I began to ruthlessly eliminate them. I said no to opportunities that would have seemed like no-brainers a month ago. I stepped back from commitments that others thought were important. I disappointed people who had expectations of me. And you know what? It was terrifying. Because I'm a people pleaser by nature. I hate disappointing people. I hate being misunderstood. I hate having people think less of me. But I realized something. I can't please both God and people. I can't say yes to his invitation to intimacy while also saying yes to everyone else's demands on my time and energy. I have to choose, and I'm choosing him. I'm also preparing for the exposure in my own life. I've gone through my finances with a fine-tooth comb, making sure everything is above board. I've confessed things to my accountability partners that I'd been keeping hidden. I've had hard conversations with people I've hurt or disappointed. I've gotten radically honest about areas where I've compromised. Because Jesus told me that I'm going to experience my own personal shaking in March 2026, and I want to make sure that when it comes, there's nothing hidden that can be used against me. I want to make sure that my foundation is solid, that I'm built on rock and not on sand. Is this comfortable? No. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Is it worth it? More than I can possibly express. Because here's what I'm discovering. The life Jesus is inviting us into is so much better than the life we've been settling for. The intimacy he's offering is so much richer than the religious activity we've been substituting for it. The freedom that comes from radical honesty and surrender is so much more satisfying than the bondage of trying to maintain an image. I went back to the meadow one more time before recording this final part. It was February 28th, exactly 2 weeks before March begins. I went at sunset this time, and I stood in that center spot where I'd encountered Jesus 3 times in the darkness. The sky was spectacular, brilliant oranges and pinks and purples, with the sun sinking below the western hills. The dried wildflower stalks were silhouetted against the colorful sky, and a gentle breeze was blowing, carrying the first hints of spring. And as I stood there, I heard his voice one more time. Not in a vision, not in a supernatural encounter, just in that still, small voice that I'm learning to recognize. Jonathan, do you see this sunset? This is what's coming. The darkness is ending. The light is breaking through. Spring is coming to places that have been winter for far too long, but you have to be watching for it. You have to be paying attention, because most people will miss the sunset because they're too busy looking down at their phones, too distracted by their tasks, too focused on their problems. Tell them to look up. Tell them to pay attention. Tell them that I'm doing something new, something beautiful, something that will take their breath away if they have eyes to see it. Tell them that March 2026 is not something to fear. It's something to anticipate with joy, because yes, there will be shaking. Yes, there will be exposure. Yes, there will be discomfort, but on the other side of all that is glory. is breakthrough, is the fulfillment of promises they've been waiting for, is intimacy with me that will satisfy their souls in ways nothing else can. Tell them I love them. Tell them I'm waiting for them. Tell them the invitation is extended, and all they have to do is say yes. So that's what I'm telling you. That's the message I was given to share. That's the burden I've been carrying since those 3 nights in the meadow. March 2026 is coming. In less than 2 weeks, everything begins to shift. The acceleration, the exposure, the invitation, and you have a choice to make. Actually, you have several choices to make. Will you take the 30-minute daily challenge seriously, or will you keep making excuses about why you don't have time? Will you examine your own life with brutal honesty, or will you keep hiding behind religious performance and hoping no one notices the cracks in your foundation? Will you cultivate hunger for Jesus himself, or will you keep settling for wanting his blessings more than you want him? Will you be willing to pay the cost of intimacy, or will you choose comfort and control and the approval of others? Will you prepare for what's coming, or will you be caught off guard when it arrives? These are not theoretical questions. These are not hypothetical scenarios. This is real. This is urgent. This is happening. I need you to do something right now before you click away from this video, before you move on to the next thing, before you forget what you've heard. I need you to make a decision out loud. Say it with your mouth. Jesus, I say yes. Yes to the 30-minute daily challenge. Yes to honest examination of my life. Yes to preparing for the acceleration. Yes to being ready for the exposure. Yes to accepting your invitation to intimacy. Yes to whatever it costs. Yes to you. Say it right now, because there's power in verbal declaration, because it moves it from your head to your heart, because it's the first step of obedience. And then I need you to do 3 more things. First, leave a comment below telling me that you've made this commitment, not for my sake, but for yours, because there's something about public declaration that strengthens your resolve. Write something like, I'm saying yes to the 30-minute daily challenge. I'm preparing for March 2026. I'm accepting the invitation to intimacy. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because I'm going to be sharing more in the coming days and weeks. Updates on what I'm experiencing, testimonies from others who are taking this seriously, practical guidance for navigating what's coming. You don't want to miss it. Third, share this message with someone who needs to hear it. Not everyone. Jesus was clear that not everyone is meant to see this message. But there's someone in your life, maybe several people, who have been marked just like you have, who are hungry for more, who are desperate for breakthrough, who are ready to say yes to intimacy with Jesus. Share it with them. Send them the link. Tell them they need to watch all 4 parts. Now, I want to address something that I know some of you are thinking. Some of you are skeptical. Some of you think I've lost my mind. Some of you think this is all too dramatic, too intense, too urgent. And I get it. I really do. If someone had shared this message with me a month ago, I probably would have been skeptical too. I probably would have thought they were being overly dramatic. I probably would have dismissed it as religious hype. But I can't unsee what I've seen. I can't unhear what I've heard. I can't deny what I've experienced. Jesus appeared to me in that meadow 3 times. He showed me things that are coming. He gave me a message to share, and I'm being obedient regardless of what it costs me, regardless of who believes me, regardless of what people think. So, if you're skeptical, that's okay. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to seek Jesus yourself. I'm asking you to spend 30 minutes in his presence and ask him if what I'm sharing is true. I'm asking you to be open to the possibility that God is doing something significant in March 2026, and that he wants you to be part of it. Because here's the thing, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If I'm wrong, if none of this happens, if March 2026 comes and goes without any of the acceleration or exposure or invitation I've described, what have you lost? 30 minutes a day spent in intimate communion with Jesus, time that would have transformed your life anyway, time that would have deepened your relationship with him regardless of whether there's a special Kairos moment or not. But if I'm right, if this is a genuine word from the Lord, if March 2026 really is a threshold moment and you ignore it, you dismiss it, you're not prepared for it, what will you have lost? An opportunity that may not come again in your lifetime, a chance to experience breakthrough, to step into your calling, to encounter Jesus in ways you've never imagined. The risk of ignoring this message is far greater than the risk of taking it seriously. I also want to speak to those of you who are feeling overwhelmed right now, those of you who are thinking, Jonathan, this sounds amazing, but I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough, disciplined enough, spiritual enough. Listen to me, you're not. None of us are. That's the whole point. This isn't about your strength or your discipline or your spirituality. This is about His grace, His power, His presence. This is about showing up and letting Him do the work in you. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to feel ready. You just have to say yes. You just have to take the first step. You just have to show up for those 30 minutes and let Jesus meet you there. And He will. I promise you, He will. Because He's more eager to meet with you than you are to meet with Him. He's been waiting for this. He's been longing for this. He's been preparing you for this, even if you didn't realize it. One more thing I need to tell you. Jesus showed me that there are people watching this right now who are at a crossroads. You're facing a major decision. You're in a season of transition. You're dealing with something that feels impossible, and you've been asking God for direction, for breakthrough, for help. This is your answer. Not the whole answer, but the beginning of it. The 30-minute daily challenge, the preparation for March 2026, the acceptance of the invitation to intimacy. This is how you're going to get the clarity you need. This is how you're going to experience the breakthrough you've been praying for. This is how you're going to navigate the transition you're in. Don't dismiss this as coincidence. Don't write it off as just another Christian video. This is a divine appointment. You are meant to see this message. You are meant to hear these words. You are meant to be here right now at this exact moment. So what are you going to do with it? I'm going to end with the image that's been in my mind since that final visit to the meadow at sunset. The image of spring coming to places that have been winter for far too long. The image of color breaking through the brown and gray. The image of life emerging from what looked dead. That's what March 2026 represents. That's what Jesus is offering. That's what's available to those who prepare, who say yes, who accept the invitation. But you have to be watching for it. You have to be paying attention. You have to be ready. The sun is setting on one season, the sun is rising on another, and those who have positioned themselves, who have created space, who have cultivated intimacy with Jesus, they're going to experience the glory of the sunrise. But those who are too busy, too distracted, too focused on everything else, they're going to miss it. They're going to wake up one day and realize that something significant happened, and they weren't part of it. Don't let that be you. Say yes to the 30-minute daily challenge. Say yes to honest examination of your life. Say yes to preparing for the acceleration. Say yes to being ready for the exposure. Say yes to accepting the invitation to intimacy. Say yes to Jesus, because He's saying yes to you. He's always been saying yes to you. And March 2026 is when that yes becomes more tangible, more accessible, more powerful than ever before. I love you. Jesus loves you. And I'm praying for everyone who has watched all 4 parts of this message, everyone who has taken it seriously, everyone who is saying yes. Leave your prayer requests in the comments. Tell me you're committing to the 30-minute daily challenge. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. March 2026 is almost here. The acceleration, the exposure, the invitation. Are you ready? You've been marked. You've been warned. You've been invited. Now it's time to respond.